This story today is so brutal. It leaves scars set deep in the American West, where dust hangs heavy and silence watches everything. It's a place where violence passes for law and a single woman can disappear without a sound. It began with a handful of riders cutting across a widow's land, a small act of cruelty that ignited a reckoning no one in Dry Creek saw coming. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The afternoon sun hung over the plains, like a copper brand pressing heat into the cracked ground, where Mara Hollis moved through her chores at an unhurried pace. She wore the same washed-out calico dress she had patched more times than she could count, sleeves rolled to her forearms, skin browned by wind and work. Grief had settled into her face and never quite left. The ranch she held on to was little more than a weather-beaten cabin, a leaning fence, and a strip of scorched grass, barely enough to keep her mule standing. The old windmill creaked with every turn, a dry groan cutting the quiet, sounding too much like the weight she carried inside. The trails beyond her land lay vacant, dusty lines, leading toward a town that talked about her, but never came. She had buried her husband there, and beside him, her boy, not yet 10. Both taken by violence, years apart. Since then, loneliness had ridden with her constant and sharp as the plains wind. A crow crossed overhead, its call ripping through the still air. Mara lifted her head from the water bucket and searched the horizon. A cloud of dust stirred far off, too heavy for cattle moving too quick to be nothing. Her pulse kicked up, though she kept her hand steady as she tipped water into the trough. The stillness seemed to tighten around her, closing in. She knew that dust the way it rose in uneven plumes. Riders. 5 of them burst from the haze horses, slick with sweat hooves tearing at the hardpan. Their laughter rolled ahead of them like a threat. Mara straightened fingers gripping the bucket's rim as her stomach twisted. She had seen them before on the outskirts of town, the Red Spur men. Gamblers, thieves worse when the mood struck. Men who answered to no law but appetite and cruelty. She had hoped her smallness would keep her invisible. Hope didn't last long in the desert. They pulled up hard in front of her horses, snorting, stamping. Their leader, a narrow-eyed man with a scar running from temple to jaw, tilted his hat with false politeness. "Afternoon widow," he drawled. "Fine little spread. Shame it's too much for just one soul." Mara's throat tightened, but she held her ground, arms crossed to hide the shake in her hands. "What do you want?" His smile widened, teeth yellow. The others laughed, easing their horses in a loose circle. One spat into the dirt. Another toyed with a whip, snapping it against his leg, the crack making her flinch. "Word is Brett Calder said your husband stashed rifles. Maybe silver too. Seems a waste to keep it buried when decent men are standing in the sun." "There's nothing here," she said, fast and thin. "You heard wrong. Wrong." The whip snapped again as one man slid from his saddle and stepped, close eyes bright with her fear. "We don't get wrong, missus. We collect what's owed." She wanted to run for the cabin, for the old rifle above the hearth, but her legs locked. Mara swayed, breath-ragged dress torn and sticking to her skin. Every movement burned, but she refused to fall. Breck chuckled. "Stubborn thing. Maybe we'll ride back tomorrow, see if that pride holds." They mounted up, laughter spilling into the heat as they turned away. Dust swallowed them, leaving Mara shaking by the trough, her body aflame. Her spirit bent, but alive. She dropped to her knees, palms pressed to the dirt, pulling strength from the land that had taken everything and still gave her shelter. Silence settled back heavy, but she wasn't alone. High on the ridge above the ranch, a lone figure sat astride a dark horse, still as a shadow cut from stone. The brim of his hat hid his face. He hadn't moved through the beating, no word, No sound. Only now, as the widow knelt in blood and dust, did he shift a sliver of sunlight, flashing off the steel of a revolver at his hip. No one in Dry Creek knew who he was. To Mara Hollis, in that moment, he was only a dark outline against the sinking sun. Still, the air around the ridge felt drawn tight, as if the desert itself had gone quiet to listen. The Red Spur men had torn her skin, but they had also caught the attention of something far more dangerous. The rider did not descend. He stayed where he was, unmoving, as iron set in stone, while the last traces of their laughter were carried off by the wind. Mara, unaware she was being watched, pressed her blood-smeared palms into the dirt and spoke through clenched teeth. "You won't take me. Not my land. Not my soul." Above her, the silent rider turned his horse slow and deliberate hooves whispering against rock. He faded into the dusk, leaving only a thin veil of dust behind. Yet the vow he carried burned as fiercely as hers, though he spoke it to no one but himself, soundless as the coming night. The Red Spur men would pay not in coin, not in pride, but in lead. Mara woke to the dull ache of torn flesh and wounded resolve. Morning light slipped through the cracked shutters, warm and gentle, as if the day held no memory of what had come before. Her back pulsed where the whip had kissed her skin, each movement lighting a fresh sting. She lay still, listening. No hooves, no laughter, no jeers. Only the brush of wind against the walls and the cabin's tired creak as it settled into daylight. Her throat felt raw with thirst. The bucket near the door sat nearly dry, her mule left unfed. She pushed herself up every step, a quiet cry in her bones. Dried blood stiffened her dress, and when she peeled the cloth from her back, she bit down hard to keep from screaming. She tore one of Jonah Hollis's old shirts, soaked it with the last of the water, and cleaned the wounds as best she could. Her hands didn't shake. Her face was pale, but she did not shed a tear. The mirror above the basin showed a woman she barely knew, eyes hollow, lips split. But beneath the bruises lived something tougher than fear. Mara Hollis was still breathing. That mattered. Later, she stood on the porch wrapped in her husband's duster, watching land she once believed time might soften. It never had. Drought lingered crops long dead, but the ground was hers. She had laid Evan beneath the cottonwood and Jonah beside him. Their names lived in that soil. She would not surrender it to men who rode in with dust and leather, convinced a lone woman could be driven off. She didn't go to town for help. She knew better. The talk would already be spreading faster than brush fire. When she limped into Dry Creek's Mercantile 2 days later, the whispers were waiting. "Shame what they did," muttered Rowan Fitch behind his mustache. "Should have just given 'em what they wanted," someone near the post office said. No sense standing up to devils. Edna Whitby slid her a tin of salve across the counter, but didn't offer a ride home. Even Sheriff Nolan Graves wouldn't meet her eyes. His badge looked stiffer than his spine. The Dry Creek folk watched from behind windows and half-shut doors. No one stepped forward. She was alone. Again. Back at the ranch, Mara patched the broken gate, tied new knots with aching fingers, fed the mule, and tended her wounds without a word. Days slipped by. The sky stayed hard and dry, the wind unkind. But she stood. She carried Jonah's rifle on her shoulder. Its weight steadied her. The bruises faded slow, but the fire beneath them did not. One afternoon, as the sun dropped behind the buttes, dust rose again on the horizon. This time, her hands held steady. She stood at the porch edge, shotgun in one hand, the other clenched tight. The gang rode in slower now, no laughter among them. Breck Calder fixed her with a narrow stare, staying mounted. "Still here," he sneered. "Thought we made it clear." She said nothing. He gestured at the land. "We're claiming this. Ain't enough law to stop us, and you sure can't." Silence. Her eyes never wavered. The men shifted in their saddles, taking her stillness as answer. "Suit yourself," Breck said. "One more sunrise to pack. After that, we burn it." They turned away. Mara stood long after the dust settled, not from fear, but from memory. That night the cabin sat dark and heavy with quiet. Rafters creaked. Coyotes cried somewhere far off. Mara sat by the fire with a pot of thin coffee, the rifle resting at her side. Her body throbbed, but her thoughts refused to rest. She remembered the last night Jonah rode out and never came back. Remembered Evan burning with fever the same week gone before any cure could reach him. The land had taken them both and still demanded she go on. Outside, the wind shifted its tone. The mule stamped inside the pen, uneasy. Mara moved to the window, her heart jumping hard in her chest. Moonlight washed the yard in pale silver, and within it something shifted. Not a man, not an animal. Just a broad, motionless shape watching. She froze. Her breath snagged. Was it one of the Red Spur men? Had they returned early to finish what they'd started? She edged closer to the rifle eyes locked on the dark outline beyond the fence. The figure did not move. It simply stood there. Seconds stretched thin. Then a full minute passed. Another. Slowly the shape turned. A faint glint at the hip caught the moonlight. A horse stepped forward quiet as mist hooves barely stirring dust. And then, just like that, the shadow slipped back into the trees. Mara stayed at the window, long after one hand gripping the frame, the other wrapped around the rifle stock. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but fear wasn't what she felt. Not quite. Somewhere beyond the dark, someone was watching. Whether for her rescue or her end, she couldn't tell. The black stallion moved like smoke along the canyon's edge hooves, dulled by sand and dry soil. Its rider looked shaped from dusk, and years-tall shoulders broad beneath a weather-worn duster. His face stayed hidden under a sweat-darkened brim skin marked by too many suns. When his eyes caught the light, they held the color of distant storms. A faint scar ran from his jaw to just beneath his left eye, worn smooth by time, but never erased. He didn't speak, not to strangers, not to those brave enough to ask. He drifted through towns like rumor and vanished the same way. In Dry Creek, folks called him the Pale Drifter. But the woman with blood on her dress and calluses on her hands would come to know him as Calder Wayne. On a morning without wind, Mara found the first sign he'd been there. A sack rested by her door, cornmeal jerky coffee, a neat bundle of clean bandages. No note, no tracks, only the faint scent of leather and horse. She stepped out barefoot, squinting into the sun eyes, searching the edge of her land. The windmill turned once slow, like a warning nod. 3 days later, he came again. This time there was a tin of salve and a box of cartridges wrapped in oilcloth, tucked beside the doorframe at dawn. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the strange comfort of knowing someone nearby. Someone who asked nothing. Someone who didn't look at her like she was already gone. By week's end, Mara finally saw him. Only once. He sat astride the black horse near the ridge where the cottonwoods thinned his shape, cut against a bleeding sunset. He didn't ride down. No wave, no word. Just watched still as a hawk waiting out a storm. Mara stood on her porch a long while, the rifle resting in her arms, watching back. When she turned away, he was gone. The town started murmuring. Wayne's back Caleb Morrow muttered, wiping soot from his brow. Didn't think he'd ride this far west again. Always shows up before trouble, said Rowan Fitch, voice low. Man's cursed. Trouble follows him. In the saloon, hands slowed, and drinks paused whenever his name drifted through the smoke. Some swore he'd been a bounty hunter. Others claimed he'd killed a sheriff in Santa Fe or lost his family to Comancheros and never spoke again. No one truly knew. But when the pale drifter came through Dry Creek, the air changed. Mara felt it too. She caught her reflection in the cracked mirror above the basin bruises, fading along her cheek lashes, healed but tender. She wrapped her shawl tight, stepped into the gold hush of dusk, and crossed the fence line. Pain still lived in her body, but her eyes were steady. She found him near the mule pen, checking the fence as though it belonged to him. The black horse stood close, reins loose, head lowered. Calder turned when she approached, but said nothing. "You're the one leaving the supplies?" She said, her voice low and firm. He gave a single nod. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me." His eyes met hers, gray, deep, unreadable. He didn't answer. The silence pressed into her chest. It wasn't cold. It wasn't pity. It was patience. The kind men carry after walking through fire and choosing never to speak of the burn. She stepped closer, lifting her chin. "I'm not broken," she said. "You don't need to feel sorry." His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought he might speak. Instead, he reached into his coat and drew out a small tin of rifle oil and set it on the fence post beside her. Then he turned away, swung up onto the stallion, and rode off, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints in the dust and a silence louder than anything spoken. That night in town, the saloon brimmed with sweat smoke and laughter. The Red Spur men crowded into a corner booth, cards spread between whiskey bottles and half-drained glasses. Breck Calder leaned back in his chair boots, crossed his voice, pitched just high enough to carry. "Widow's got grit," he said with a crooked grin. "I'll give her that. Didn't squeal half as much as I expected." The table erupted in laughter. One man let out a mocking yelp mimicking her cry. Another slapped his glass against the scarred wood in time with an imaginary lash. A tray clattered to the floor. No one bent to pick it up. Next time, Breck said, smiling thin, "We take it all." Fence mule land, his eyes gleamed, maybe teach her what a real brand feels like. Cards slapped the table. Bottles clinked. The stench of cowardice hung thick and no one challenged it. No one except the shadow across the street. Calder Wayne stood beneath the frame of the old livery duster, shifting in the low breeze. A stub of cigar glowed faint at his mouth. He didn't blink. Didn't move. He listened. When the moon climbed above the rooftops, Mara Hollis saw him again. Not in passing. Not from a distance. He sat outside her cabin, one leg stretched forward, hunched over an old revolver opened across his knee. The gun was worn smooth-blued steel, rubbed pale by years of draw and fire. Beside him lay a strip of oiled cloth bullets and tools lined neat as ritual. Each soft click of metal sounded like thunder in the night. Mara watched from the window, breath shallow. Calder Wayne wasn't waiting. He was preparing. The night shattered with fire. She smelled the smoke before she saw the glow creeping through the shutter cracks like a devil's breath. Then came the sounds, hooves, laughter glass breaking against stone. Mara sprang from her cot, heart slamming, and pulled the rifle down from above the hearth. Her hands shook not with fear, but with certainty. Outside orange light flickered across the porch boards. The barn was already burning dry, timbers roaring as flames clawed skyward. Shapes moved beyond the fence, 5 riders, maybe 6, and one carried a torch. She stepped into the heat wind, whipping her hair. The rifle weighed heavy in her hands, heavier than it ever had for Jonah Hollis. She sighted the torchbearer, her voice raw. "Drop it." Laughter cut off short. Breck Calder rode forward, reins loose, hat tipped back. Firelight danced wild in his eyes, teeth flashing like a coyote's grin. "You gonna shoot, widow?" The man with the torch chuckled and tossed it high. The flame arced toward her cabin, everything she had left. A scream caught in Mara's throat, but she didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked sharp. The torchbearer fell hard, flame dying in the dirt beside him. The rest scattered in surprise, then swung back, guns up, rage twisting their faces. Mara dove behind the water trough as bullets chewed into the cabin walls, splinters raining down. She rolled, worked the bolt, chambered another round with shaking fingers. Her shoulder burned from the kick, but she didn't flinch. Outnumbered, surrounded. She rose again, rifle up, then froze. The night had shifted. No laughter, no shouting. Only wind and the distant crackle of fire, and a gunshot that wasn't hers. One rider jerked, pitched from the saddle, hit the ground hard. Another barely turned before a second round punched through his chest, throwing him backward into the dust. 3 shots followed, clean and fast-spaced, with deadly calm. Mara dropped into a crouch, heart-hammering eyes searching the dark. From the tree line, he stepped forward. Calder Wayne, wrapped in shadow revolver, smoking boots silent on the ground. His duster flared as he walked face set like stone. No rush, no panic. Just the cold, steady calm of a man who had done this before in towns the world had already forgotten. He moved as if aiming were unnecessary, as if he already knew where every man would move before they did. One of the remaining riders broke first, spurring his horse hard and shouting over his shoulder, "He's here, it's him." 2 more followed, cursing as they fled, hooves throwing sparks and dust as they vanished into the open desert, leaving their dead behind. Mara Hollis straightened slowly, the rifle hanging loose in her hands. Her chest heaved, breath torn and shallow, her eyes wide now, not with fear, but with something close to awe. Calder Wayne stopped beside the body of the man who had carried the torch. He knelt, picked up the scorched cloth, and tossed it into the water trough. Then he slid his revolver back into its holster with a slow, practiced ease. Mara stepped closer, her voice barely more than air. "You." He turned. Firelight carved his features sharp and hard, weathered by years, but not cruel. They stood in silence, broken only by popping timbers and the distant whinny of frightened horses. "What are you?" she asked, not accusing, just needing the truth. His eyes met hers, gray as dusk. "I was a lawman once," he said, at last, his voice dry and worn. "Before the law went hollow, that was all." He walked past her into the dark, heading for the ridge. Mara stood amid smoke and embers, watching him disappear. The cabin still stood. The barn was gone, the fence burned and broken, but she was alive, still standing, and the men who had come to take everything were running. Somewhere in the dark, Breck Calder spat blood and swore vengeance. Even so, he understood what Mara now knew. Calder Wayne was not just a man. He was judgment. The moon climbed high, washing the desert in silver and shadow. Calder Wayne rode beneath it, a figure of silence astride the black stallion. Dust streamed behind him like pale wings. No words crossed his lips. The only sound was the soft creak of leather and the muted rhythm of hooves on sand. He had become motion itself, steady, unyielding, inevitable. The desert did not question him. Ancient canyons opened wide and swallowed him. He passed through them like a windless storm, following the trail of panic left by the Red Spur men. He needed no map, no guide. Men like them always ran the same way, toward places they believed justice could not reach. They were wrong. The first fell beneath a blood-orange sky. He had paused at a canyon rim, gasping, boots torn, horse lathered. He never heard the shot, only the crack that split the gorge like thunder. His body pitched forward and vanished into stone and shadow. Calder Wayne did not slow. He reloaded as he rode. By midnight, the second veered west, desperate for water. He found a shallow pool fed by a dying spring, its surface smooth as glass. He dropped to his knees, gulping dust thick on his tongue. The night was quiet, too quiet. When he stood, water dripping from his beard, the bullet struck him between the eyes. He collapsed backward into the pool, red, spreading through the reflected stars. Calder Wayne passed without looking. The third tried hiding in the husk of an old silver mine, sunken between two hills, timbers sagging like rotten ribs. The entrance yawned like the mouth of a forgotten god. He crouched inside, pistol tight in his hand, breath loud in his ears. Oh. Calder did not come from the front. He came from above, a shadow on stone boots, soundless. The man never saw him until white light filled the mine. By then, it was already over. Back at the ranch, Mara sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the black horizon. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Her eyes were clear-haunted. In her lap lay Jonah Hollis's journal pages of ranch tally supply notes and once love letters. She couldn't read them. All she saw was Calder Wayne riding into the night, bound to no law but his own. She thought of the way he moved. The silence wrapped around him, the care in his hands, as he cleaned his revolver, not with hunger, but with respect. He wasn't only fighting. He was remembering. Half-starved and wild-eyed, he found what he needed below a knot of drifters camped in a ravine, hired guns with more rounds than scruples. He offered Gold Whiskey Land whatever would stick. They laughed when he named who was coming. They stopped laughing when he showed them the bodies. Rifles came up. As the sun bled red and copper across the flats, Breck stood on the ridge and smiled without warmth. "You're just a ghost, Wayne," he muttered to the wind. "Let's see if ghosts bleed." Far behind him, beyond twisted stone and echoing hollows, Calder rode on. The land waited. Wind rose that evening, scouring dust across the broken walls of an abandoned frontier fort. Weathered, thin, and long forgotten, the place sagged like a dying monument. Walls crumbling, gates split. The watchtower collapsed into splintered beams. Inside its hollowed heart, Breck waited with 6 rifles and 3 hired killers. Their faces were rough and unknown, drawn by coin, not cause. He paced the battlement, slow spat into the dirt, fingers hovering near his belt. His eyes never left the ridge, the rocks, the moving air. He knew it now. He wasn't the hunter. Beyond the fort, Mara Hollis gripped the reins with one hand, Jonah Hollis's rifle strapped across her back. The whip's bite still burned days later, each jolt of the saddle lighting her ribs on fire. She rode anyway. The mule was slow and awkward on stone, but she would not turn back. She'd seen too many men die alone. Ahead, the desert stretched wide and red under a bruised sky. Clouds boiled low. She pressed on. At the ridge, Calder Wayne dismounted without a word. He let the black stallion drift free, calm as himself. Alone at the fort's mouth, he stood with revolver drawn. The air tightened with an ending. Inside, someone spotted him and hissed a warning. The hired guns scattered rifles poking through slits, one crouched by the gate, another high in the broken tower with a shotgun. Breck stayed still, eyes narrowing. "Knew it'd be you," he muttered. Calder said nothing. "Thought you were dead," Breck went on, stepping forward. "They said the law hanged you." Calder didn't blink. Guess it didn't stick. The wind broke. Silence with it. Gunfire tore from the wall. Bullets ripped air and timber dust bursting up. Calder moved like a flash, ducking behind a wrecked cart, answering with short, measured bursts. One man fell before he could reload. A scream from the tower as a single shot punched through a throat. Smoke curled between broken brick. Sounds rang: sharp boots, scraping shells, pinging hammers, clicking back. Calder advanced, sidestepping across open ground with chilling grace. Every move clean, every shot exact. Two tried to flank him, shouting as they rounded the north wall. He dropped one center mass. The other took a round between the eyes. Neither cried out. Blood darkened the dust. Mara reached the ridge as the last hired gun fell. She pulled the mule up hard, heart pounding, watching from behind stone. Calder stood alone now in the yard, smoke lifting from the barrel coat, snapping in the heated wind. Breck stepped from behind a wagon alone, hand trembling near his holster. "You ain't just a bounty hunter," he said, swallowing. "You're Calder, Wayne. Hell, I know you. Dodge Junction." Calder nodded once. "You were a lawman," Breck said. "A damn good one." Breck's face twisted. "They said you turned on your own. Said you wouldn't look away." Calder let out a slow breath. "They strung me up like a dog." The words hung there, heavy as the dust. "They said your wife was fair game." The revolver answered. One shot. Breck Calder's snapped backward hands clutching at his chest. He hit the ground hard, mouth slack, eyes wide, not with shock, but with a grim knowing. As the light drained from him, he breathed, "I didn't want it to be you." Calder Wayne stood over him in silence, watching the dust settle. Mara Hollis stepped into the fort slowly, Jonah's rifle still slung across her shoulder. She moved past body smoke and shattered stone, her boots darkening the blood-soaked earth. She stopped a few paces from him, breath uneven. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. Calder turned. Firelight caught his face beneath a wide, brim-lined, weathered, unreadable. "Yes," he said at last, his voice distant as rolling thunder. "I did." Tears burned her eyes, not for the dead, not for the smoke or the sharp bite of gunpowder, but for the emptiness she saw in his. That silence cut deeper than any wound. She reached out, brushed his arm. "Thank you." He didn't answer. Calder turned away, walking toward the black stallion, waiting at the yard's edge. He mounted in one smooth motion and tipped his hat to her, a gesture heavier than words. Then he rode into the desert. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Some say he vanished after that night, swallowed by sand and wind. Others swear he still watches from the ridges, appearing where justice fails, and lead speaks louder than law. But in Dry Creek, the Dry Creek folk remember the night a widow bled, and how the pale drifter made them pay in lead. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.